Rewind, your week in review is sponsored by the Transportation Development Association of Wisconsin, sharing one goal: enhancing the quality of life in Wisconsin through the development and maintenance of a strong transportation network. The Transportation Development Association of Wisconsin. It's how we get there.
Because I don't want to go backwards. I want to keep going forward. Together, that's exactly where we're going to go. God bless you.
I'm Steve Walters.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
This is a rewind for a historic week in the Wisconsin Legislature, a week that got the state a new definition of lame duck session. First of all, sounds and sights from that. Wish I was there.
We do not believe that any one individual should have the opportunity to come in and, with a stroke of the pen, eliminate laws that have been passed by our legislature and found constitutional by our courts. Whether everyone here likes it or not, I respect the fact that Tony Evers is the governor and he's going to be starting on January 7th. But he's not the governor today. And that's why we are going to make sure that the powers of each branch are as equal as they can be.
The weak comments that we've heard about co-equal branches and trying to make things are fair don't stand up when you look at the actual power grabs that are being done as part of these bills today. What does suppressing the time that people can vote in the state have to do with equal branches of government? Today is a disgrace as Republican legislature shows direct contempt for the voters of our state.
You're messing with people's lives when you're messing with Medicaid. You are messing with their well-being. You're messing, in some cases, with their ability to go to sleep at night, wondering if or if not they're going to wake up with health insurance the next morning.
I'm going to ask the Senate Sergeant at Arms to clear the gallery, and the Senate will stand informal.
Even though we've been in session for all day and all night and coming on the morning, the Republicans haven't debated. They've come down with bills that we haven't had a chance to read, and they don't even come up and defend them.
You are limiting opportunities for the 650 women-owned businesses in Wisconsin as it relates to the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, Mr. Speaker, and that is an attack on women.
I am a woman-owned business. The majority of women that I know that own a business don't need nor want a handout. The gentle lady from the 71st is very young. I'm sure she's not a business owner and thinks that we all need to be subsidized.
Our current system, allowing the DOJ, giving them that authority, one statewide elected representative to handle our statewide issues, means that they look at this issue with statewide implication. Not who gave them more money, not who they represent or who their constituency is, but what is best for Wisconsin, for the whole state. That person's Josh Kaul.
We're also accused of denying the peaceful transfer of power. It was not our side that trashes the building when they lose an election. It's not our side. It's not our side that damaged the door outside of Joint Finance as they held their hearing just recently. It's not our side that drops F-bombs in the rotunda as the governor is trying to light the Christmas tree. We don't do that. We do respect elections.
We have spent a lot of time negotiating with the state Senate. That's part of the reason we had some of the delays, was to try to find a way to get to yes on pre-existing conditions. We believe in this proposal. We believe it's a good idea. So I have no doubt we're going to keep pushing on pre-existing conditions, and I'm disappointed it didn't happen.
One of the central issues in the AG's race and in the governor's race was whether Wisconsin should withdraw from the lawsuit that's seeking to invalidate the Affordable Care Act. At no point in the election process did anybody say the legislature might change the process so that the new governor may not be able to direct the attorney general to withdraw from that lawsuit.
JR, define lame duck session for those viewers that need a quick definition.
It is a session that comes after an election between the election results and the new legislature being sworn in.
And we haven't had one for 8 years.
We haven't had one for 8 years. We also have had very few of them going back to 1928, like a half dozen roughly. Yeah. This is the only one that's really dealt with stuff like this. Most have been like union contracts. There's a Rose Bowl commission, I think, in the 60s. I mean, stuff like that. But this is the first one that's dealt with this kind of substance after election results have come in and before a new legislature comes.
Okay, to set the scene, you had Republicans who controlled the legislature, an incoming Democratic governor. And let's focus first on the changes that they passed and now are on Governor Walker's desk. limiting the authority of the new governor, Tony Evers. Let's start with Mr. Evers must share WEDIC, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation appointees with legislators. And there's this bizarre provision. He can't name the next CEO of WEDIC until September 1?
Yes, that power will be given.
9-month training wheels or what?
Essentially, the Assembly Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, both Republicans right now, will get to have a majority of the appointments on the board for 9 months, and their appointees basically have a majority of the board, which appoints the CEO. So they basically get to protect, if they want to, Secretary Hogan until September 1st, if he wants to stick around, or pick somebody that they like to be the agency head for the first 9 months of the Evers administration.
Right, and is this 9 months critical in protecting the Foxconn contract?
I've been asking about that, about other things. All I can find out is this is what basically flew through the state Senate or Republican caucus, because originally the proposal that came out late last week was to give the majority appointees from Voss and Fitzgerald, they'd have majority appointees, they would pick the secretary, period. Right. There'd be no like returning it to Governor Evers. It'd be the Assembly Speaker and Senate Majority Leader having those picks and being with them. Okay, let's talk about some other changes on the governor's authority. The governor must get permission from the Ledge to change programs run by state and federal governments. This is very important. Food stamps, our public benefits programs. Yeah, so they narrowed it. Originally, it was every agency, every waiver. So you have to get a waiver from the federal government. There are requirements of like you have to do A, B, and C. Well, you can get a waiver from the federal government to do something different or experiment, if you will. Originally, it was going to be every single agency waiver for the feds, but it had gone through the legislature. Now it's down to the Department of Health, which is a pretty big department still. Yes, it administers probably the most important agency when it comes to these waivers. But we're talking like food stamps, we're talking like Medicaid, all these things. The governor will also, his administration will have to report the names of prison inmates released before serving full sentences. That'll have to be publicly disclosed. The governor must share power in new ways over state agency rules with the legislature, and JR, he must implement the work requirements for Medicaid and the drug test to receive food stamps that we just recently got federal waivers for. And those things, those are policies that were debated in the legislature and got a full airing and were put in place via waiver, which is doesn't carry the weight of law. Right. So it allowed, without this change, and if Governor Walker signs it, Evers could walk in on day one and rescind all this stuff. So they're basically putting into law policy that they debated before, much like with voter ID. The voter ID law was challenged, went to federal court. A judge said you got to do some changes. Governor Walker did it via executive order, not via new law change. They're taking that change, the executive order, and making it law to keep that in place. Okay, and this is a great time to listen to a few minutes of actual, the debate on the floor of the Assembly, which went on, it was an all-nighter. And so let's listen to both sides talking about some of the merits, the new infringements on Governor Evers' power. Note that when co-chairman of the Finance Committee, John Nygren, spoke, he was speaking at 5:45 in the morning. Let's listen to some of that debate.
There's probably 20 healthcare organizations that submitted a statement saying, don't do this. This is going to hurt. This is going to hinder our ability to serve patients. This bill doesn't allow the Department of Health Services to raise Medicaid reimbursement rates administratively without JFC review, which is what Governor Walker has done. He did it for mental health and substance abuse. He raised reimbursement rates because we had a critical shortage of mental health providers. You all weren't screaming then. You didn't do a thing about it then. It was fine then. Well, what's changed? You didn't say a word when there were 53 MA amendments to our Medicaid plan that DHS obtained since 2015. We would not be here tonight if Scott Walker had been reelected. We would not be here tonight if Brad Schimmel had been reelected.
Now we have waivers in place that will help us to bring accountability to the system and true help for people in the programs. Help with job training and requiring work so that they can get back into the system, out of welfare and into the workforce, exactly like these programs are supposed to do. Without this bill, a new governor can come into office and just that one person could stop all that work.
The governor-elect has publicly expressed his desire to undo things that this legislative body has passed through not only the committee process, through both houses of the legislature, signed into law by the governor. And by the way, some things maybe you didn't like, but were reaffirmed when the people of the state of Wisconsin re-elected both the governor and senators in recall elections, and also members of this body. So for us as a equal branch of government, when somebody says that they're simply going to do away with things such as voter ID with a signature, or to do away with Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, which has resulted in thousands of jobs in my district, Mr. Speaker, I believe that we as a body should be able to sit down with that governor-elect and negotiate. If those things are important to him, as they are to us, we should come at this from an equal and balanced position. For whatever reason, this is being portrayed as somehow we're taking all power away from the executive branch, and that is simply not the case.
Republicans in this body are attempting to nullify the results of our most recent election. Nobody, absolutely nobody in Wisconsin went in to cast their ballot with the expectation that if they voted for one candidate for governor, he would have certain responsibilities. And if they voted for another candidate for governor, he would have totally different responsibilities. And yet here we are within a month, a little month, and the Republicans are overriding the results of our election, our voice, and our government. To what end? It can't be to reduce the size, cost, and complexity of government, because these bills will add more red tape to government for no reason other than the naked ambitions of Republican legislative leadership. This body had 8 years to make these changes. At least the Senate Majority Leader gave us the courtesy of his candor when he basically said these bills are about undermining the recent election because the Republicans, who had complete control for 8 years, didn't like the outcome.
In addition to curbing the powers of Governor-elect Tony Evers, also Attorney General-elect Josh Kaul. And let's just consider a few ways. The governor and attorney general will not be able to withdraw from the ACA Affordable Care lawsuit filed in Texas with a federal judge. The ledge is going to have to approve that. That's kind of a standoff. We know that ain't going to happen, correct?
No, there's no way they're going to approve that. That's also one of the key kind of main campaign pledges that Josh Kaul made ahead of his election, was that he was going to do something like that.
Right. DOJ must now negotiate how they distribute settlements for consumer protection and other major settlements.
JFC approval, yes.
Yeah, Josh Kaul said this will add months to the negotiations, and it could affect some of these settlements go for like crime victim programs and other. So now you have the legislature potentially dictating how some of the settlement cash could go. Some of this. Large amounts.
It depends on how active JFC wants to be about this. Are they going to be somewhat passive and only jump in on the big things? Or are they going to go over every single settlement and try and insert themselves? If they do, then yeah, it's going to be a real problem for Kaul if it's signed by Governor Walker.
And then it's okay for Republican Attorney General Brad Schimmel to have a four-lawyer office of the Solicitor General, but it's not okay for a Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul to have the office of the Solicitor General. Why not?
Well, the argument from Republicans is they don't really need it now. But it honestly, like, you know, they're not going to lack for attorneys at the Department of Justice, even with this change, if it's signed by Governor Walker. The whole idea behind this office was that you could get a higher profile attorney because you have the title of Solicitor General of Wisconsin. That is an attractive thing for somebody who wants to build his or her resume.
Yes.
Now that goes away. So it's not like Josh Kaul can't sue the Trump administration with somebody else. He doesn't have that title and the person's name doing the suing.
Right.
And maybe it impacts the quality of attorney you get to fill that lead role.
And I think our Solicitor General, whose job is about to be abolished, argued before the U.S. Supreme Court in the last few years. Okay, lastly, huge issue. Legislators will be authorized to hire private counsel to defend new laws, but originally this would take the place of DOJ representation, so this was scaled back.
Yeah, that may be the most problematic provision of anything that they did, or maybe the way to put it is one most likely to end up in court and face a serious challenge, because what it originally said that the legislature could say, no, Attorney General Kaul, you're not going to defend this law. We're going to hire private attorneys to do it instead. Now it just gives them standing. Another big thing is the settlement money from DOJ goes to general fund now, not to DOJ. That's going to be an issue that's kind of been underreported about how that affects what Kaul can do, because that money can be significant sometimes to go toward paying for programs. The difference between these things, though, is with Evers, he still has the veto pen. It's a great equalizer in the relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Yeah. And honestly, if you go through these bills, I mean, there are some serious changes about like the balance of powers, but they're not taking away like the Evers veto pen or in the Constitution. These are kind of like how government works type provisions, and it's more of a, you know, Republican lawmakers over Evers' shoulder constantly. With Kaul, it's a little bit different because he doesn't have that equalizer in the veto pen.
And his duties are specified. It says in the Constitution, the Attorney General's duties and responsibilities shall be delegated by the legislature. So if we're talking lawsuits here, and Mr. Evers and Mr. Kaul are both suggesting they could be filed, it seems to me that a more potentially successful area is that you have limited the inherent powers of the governor and not the Attorney General.
Well, Governor Jim Doyle served from 2003 to 2011. He did a news conference this week and talked about this, that some original provisions, for example, that one about substituting the AG for a private attorney on a case that's challenged. He said, well, you can't tell a court who it has to recognize as the attorney. You mean you could file a substitution request and you know they will consider that, but you can't dictate things. And there's an infringement of the powers of the office, both of the AG and the governor. So there's still probably some lawsuits filed to feel out where the limits are. The questions are like, where does it go? When's it up to the state Supreme Court? Oh, by the way, what's the majority look like in that state Supreme Court when it gets there? There are a lot of things that this may drag out for a while. But what's interesting to me is that the messaging on this whole thing for Republicans did not go well. They lost the PR battle about this. It gave Evers a golden opportunity to say, look, here I am, I'm trying to work with these guys, I want to be a bipartisan governor, but they won't be a willing partner. Because if you look at it, the next 4 years are probably going to be a challenging one for Evers about getting stuff done. Now, they'll probably find some things to do, but they're not going to really embrace, Republicans, the Evers agenda. So for Evers, you have to have, or it's good for you to have this say, look, I tried, look what they did.
And in my pocket, I have what has been called the broadest veto authority in the nation.
And the budget's going to be a huge part of, a huge chapter of this relationship of how does it work. There's a way to work off, we call it the base budget. Basically, it's what exists right now. So Evers will produce his budget probably in February. Governors, first-term governors might get an extension most of the time to push back the introduction of their budget. Whenever he puts it out there, there will be an opportunity for Republicans to either go, okay, we're going to work off of your document, or base budget.
Our current budget. And mark it up from there.
Did every small agency, will they go through every single one line by line? So they may use like this small from Evers, but the big things like taxes, like spending, like they may work off the base. Well, how's that going to work? Is Evers going to veto the entire budget? If they do that, these are all kind of ifs. If they do that, would Evers veto the entire budget? Can he use that partial veto authority to change it enough to make him happy? I mean, this could dictate or be a big thing to say, how's it going to work between these guys going forward?
Yeah, and this is the stuff that we're going to be talking about March through June when the actual budget process. Okay, new subject. About 3 weeks ago, WisPolitics, you guys reported there were 150 pending appointments. And this week, Mr. Evers said, please don't confirm, State Senate, these appointments. And the State Senate confirmed like 82 of them.
Yes.
And Mr. Evers said that put politics before people. The appointees were jammed through without transparency. Democrats on the floor of the Senate said these appointees had not filed, in some cases, their statement of economic interest, and there'd been no public hearings. Now, 2 of these I want to land on because 2 of them were to the Board of Regents, Mr. Bechtel and Mr. Tiedemann. I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name. So they will be on the regents. They will be Walker appointees, but Mr. Evers will get 3 appointments in next year to the regents?
So it's an 18-member body. What's significant here is that Brian Stile, who won the race for the 1st Congressional District, he was a regent. He's resigning, which clears the way for Bechtel to replace him. That's important because Stile's term went through 2023, I believe.
23, yes.
That means we have another Walker member of the board through all of Governor Evers' first term. The other gentleman, he was the non-traditional student appointee. I went and looked through kind of the terms for the folks on the Board of Regents, they will be a majority of Walker appointees until 2022, which is the year that Evers would seek re-election. At that point, he'll cross a threshold of his appointees plus, if you look at the DPI superintendent, who you think would be somebody who would be likely was automatically on the board and likely would be, have a good relationship with Evers because Evers is going to appoint that person at this point. That gives the majority of the appointments on the board, and then the board has a power to hire and fire the university president. So just have to keep an eye on about that, what the university trajectory is going to be once that change takes effect.
And just a PS, at his last meeting of the Board of Regents, he said, thank you very much for putting up with me for 9.5 years, and my appointments to the board will not be, quote, my employees. But anyway, okay, let's turn to what passed and what didn't. The major thing that was approved, limiting early or absentee voting to 2 weeks before the election. Now, is that something that is in violation of a past federal court order?
A judge will decide. So the law is still on the books that said it's only going to be 2 weeks, limited to the one polling place per municipality. You can't do it on Sunday, limits the hours. What Republicans are hoping is that this new version, which repeals that law and places this one in place, it's still 2 weeks. It has no limits on hours, polling sites,
no limits
or days,
on hours. Right.
Days that can be offered.
Right.
They're hoping that is going to pass constitutional muster. Now we'll see. I'm not a judge or a lawyer. I'm not going to predict what a court will do, but it will be back in court again. What's interesting is right now there are no limits on when you start offering in-person absentee voting other than the ballots must be prepared. They have to be ready 47 days out for election. We had a record number of absentee votes cast
More than
in a
500,000.
midterm election this year.
Yeah.
Governor Walker was putting social media posts up a month out from the election or encouraging people to go early vote because people like it. Now, Republicans complain that places like Madison and Milwaukee in particular get to have this longer window to early vote.
They have
than in
more
their
staffing
communities.
resources to support it.
They also have more residents. There's a big reason why. You also don't see, I guess the argument can be made from Democrats of, well, why don't you just encourage your clerks in, municipality X to open the window longer? They just don't do it. So why do you want to limit what Madison and Milwaukee do because of what you guys aren't doing back home? Right. Now, a judge will ultimately decide that's going to court, no two ways about it.
Right. Okay, and let's look quickly at the three major provisions that were that did not pass. First of all, this extraordinary session was called to deal with Kimberly-Clark tax breaks. Never even got a vote. The Senate did not pass a attempted compromise on pre-existing conditions, and the presidential primary in 2020. In 2020, was not moved from April to March. Let's listen to three Assembly leaders, Voss, Nygaard, and Steineke, on what did not pass. Please.
You talked about how important it was to you to pass the pre-existing conditions legislation and the Kimberly-Clark bill. Can you comment a little bit about those not making it through the Senate and what, if any, path forward there is for those in the next session?
Well, on pre-existing conditions, because that's something that I said was my most important priority, obviously I'm deeply disappointed. Our chamber passed it a long time ago. I have a feeling that will be either AB1 or darn close to it in the next session because we believe in this proposal. We believe it's a good idea.
I went and talked to Senator-elect Andre Jacques. No Democrats voted for it in the state Senate. We're sending 3 of our members over to be state senators, and I went to him because he'll be assuming a position that's currently held by a Democrat. So that vote could make the difference between that becoming law or not. And I think you heard his comments on the floor that he hoped to be the deciding vote on that in the Senate come 2019. So I think that's great news.
Well, and when it comes to Kimberly-Clark, as the author of the bill in the Assembly, of course, I was extremely disappointed that didn't become law over in this, or didn't get passed in the Senate, so it could become law. Governor Walker, worked extremely hard over the course of the last few months to get that across the finish line. I'm afraid politics played a role. I was hoping once we got past the politics of the election that there would be more support for it. Obviously, that we couldn't garner any support from the Democrats. I was really disappointed that Governor-elect Evers didn't step forward and take this opportunity to show some leadership and at least give his opinion one way or another whether he thought it was a good idea. That's something I hope that he'll learn over time, that his voice is extremely important in matters like this. And I hope as we get into the new year that when we are struggling with issues like this, that he'll utilize that as a place where he can show some leadership.
Okay, time's a little short, but you got 2 PSs on Kimberly Clark?
Governor Walker Friday morning tweeted that now the Senate did not pass the bill. He's going to look for a way to keep those jobs here. We reported on Wednesday that Scott Fitzgerald, some earlier, told us that Walker had instructed the WEDC CEO, Mark Hogan, to go out and try and find a package outside the legislation that would make it work. We haven't got any comment from WEDC about that yet, but that's something to keep an eye on. Can they find an alternative that makes that whole thing work up in the Fox Valley?
Okay, JR, now let's throw it forward. Let's look at some of the legacy of this lame duck. January, new governor, new attorney general, and new legislature and distrust. I mean, when Senate Majority Leader Fitzgerald says, we don't trust Tony Evers right now, and Speaker Voss said about 6 times, I respect that Mr. Evers will be the governor, but he's not the governor today. When Gordon Hint says we've never had a lame duck session to pass policies that take power away from the executive branch, first time, only time. And when Governor-elect Evers says it's a hot mess, what does it mean for cooperation in January? Bipartisanship in January gone?
How many bipartisan bills on major things you remember passing in the last 8 years?
Not too many, sir.
So it's going to be that relationship we talked about how does the Evers-Voss-Fitzgerald thing work? Voss has been positioning himself as the conservative voice of the resistance to, an Evers administration. He wants to be in that role, like leading the Republican charge against this, standing firm against what Evers does. I don't know how it's going to work, to be honest with you. I mean, look, they have not been getting along for a long time. There's not like there's a lot of kumbaya moments in the Capitol. Let's look. Foxconn got a couple of Dem votes from the area. What
Barker
else?
And Mason.
Yeah.
Barker and Mason.
What else big happened in the last 8 years? Act 10 wasn't bipartisan. I mean, this is the way it's been, and not just last 8 years, but like for a long, long time.
Okay.
So that's not going to change. But the comments that you highlighted underscored the poor messaging Republicans had in this whole thing with, Voss talking constantly about it's about balancing the powers, and Fitzgerald come out saying, no, we don't trust Evers. Or about that presidential primary move, which didn't happen.
Right.
It's all about Daniel Kelly. I mean, that messaging just didn't, I don't know you can message this well no matter what you try to do, because it's a lame duck session, trying to push these things through, but they just did not message it well, and the publicity was bad for them, the headlines were bad, and it's going to be a tense relationship going forward.
But this issue going forward is so important that I want to now, I want us to hear from Democratic Leader Hintz, Speaker Voss, and then Governor-elect Evers on just the uncertainty and potential distrust going into the January when we all start anew. Please.
And let me remind you, no amount of spinning can get around the fact that even at the hearing, the Fiscal Bureau or Reference Bureau said, we have never had a lame duck session to pass policies that take away power from the executive branch and the Attorney General. First time, only time. Now we're going to come back in January, but it's not going to be what it should be. I reminded you earlier about what happened after Act 10, about the toxic partisanship that took over, because it's not okay, and it won't be okay. And the people of Wisconsin are going to see you guys in court, and it's going to be a mess. All because you guys couldn't help yourselves. But do not hold the voters of Wisconsin in contempt as you've done, and do not pretend that anything that we have done in this body today is remotely normal or remotely okay. If you vote for this, shame on you. You will go down in history as a disgrace.
And the next 4 years are going to have divided government. We're going to have every opportunity to show everyone in Wisconsin who voted for divided government that we will argue. We're going to argue a lot, because that's what happens in a democracy when you have free people. But you have to start at a place where you both have equal footing to negotiate. That's what these bills are all about. Equal footing to negotiate. That's why I have no doubt that when we come back in January, the people on the right side of this chamber are going to have open arms. We are going to look for ways to say, where can we work together? But I promise you that at least the Republicans that I represent in this chamber are not going to make it personal. We're not going to yell and scream. We're not going to find protesters at the inauguration. And we're going to make sure that the constituents we represent are proud of the job that we do over the course of the next 2 years, because that's what they sent us here to do.
The will of the people has been officially been ignored by the legislature. So we need to have people reach out to Governor Walker, and then we'll take, if the next step needs to happen, all issues are on the table, whether it's litigation or other issues. We are exploring anything to make sure that this legislation does not get into practice. The whole thing's a mess. And so my belief is that the people of Wisconsin have spoken, and that this collective piece of legislation, the 3 bills that were passed, are a repudiation of that.
Okay, we're a little bit of overtime, but it's been a hectic week. Yeah. Stock picks rising.
Ellen Nowak, DOA Secretary, former legislative aide, is going back to the Public Service Commission. This is one of those.
As the chair.
As the chair. This is one of those last-minute moves that happens in administrations where Lon Roberts was chair of the PSC. Lon Roberts, when I was told, was happy being chair of the PSC as long as Scott Walker was governor. Now that he's not interested. So to fill that spot quickly, they put Ellen Nowak back there, which guarantees a spot that's Republican appointee through 2023. Rich Zipperer, who was Walker's chief of staff, his term is up March 1st, didn't confirm him. So that means Evers should replace him on day one. Well, Zip's going to go be the chief of staff for Brian Stile, as Wisconsin-based chief of staff. The point is that there are all these appointments were about putting people in place to shore up Republican control of some of these bodies, like the Board of Regents, the next few years while Evers is governor.
Okay, and mixed.
So Brad Courtney,
State Republican Party chairman.
Reelected chair. Here's the thing.
With a caveat, though.
Reelected on an interim basis. He will serve at least through doing this post-mortem. Look, in this business.
Which Priebus is going to do?
He's going to help. He's going to at least help.
Okay.
In this business, anytime there's a bad thing that happens and a change happens, there's an assumption of, oh, he was forced out. I've been told by multiple people that's not the case. Brad Courtney was happy being chair as long as Governor Walker was governor because they're good friends. He's done. He's been the longest serving chair in state history. He wanted to be done, but there's a requirement under party rules that you have to have a chair election within 45 days of the November election. There's not enough time to find somebody new who can lead the party and check the boxes of credit with the grassroots, credibility with the donor class, knowledge of the party. He fits all those roles, gives them a bridge to the new leadership once his postmortem is done, and the April election is probably over. Then they'll go from there.
Yep. Do you believe there were calls made to former party vice chair Brian Schimming to become the new chair?
Oh, I think there will be a lot of people jockeying for position to run for that office. But again, the turnaround time is very difficult. It's a 33-member executive council that elects the chair. To get support. Oh, by the way, Ron Johnson, he's been quite vocal about this process. If you haven't noticed, he's been sending messages to committees saying what he wanted to see in this postmortem, and that he asked Brad to serve on an interim basis as this bridge. So
yes.
Watch the influence of Ron Johnson going forward.
Ron Johnson, who has said he's serving what will be his last term in the U.S. Senate. Okay, falling.
So Daniel Kelly saying thanks for nothing.
Justice Kelly.
Thanks for nothing, guys. So look, this whole idea about moving the primary off the April ballot in 2020 and moving it to March, politically, let's say electorally, it makes sense for Daniel Kelly because it would help him not having a ginned up Democratic base voting for the person who's going to challenge Donald Trump in 2020. They didn't make the move, and so politically it's a loser. It's a lose-lose for him now because not only they add like this fuel to the fire of the progressive base going, well, this guy is, attached to Governor Walker and he's all these partisan hacks. They don't move the primary, which means he may face a jazzed up Democratic base in April 2020. Here's the other thing. There's an election this spring, April. Elisa Neubauer and Brian Hagedorn, both appeals court judges. Neubauer is kind of like the left of center judge.
Hagedorn appointed by Walker, Neubauer appointed by Doyle.
Yeah. So you just added fuel to the progressive base around April, by the way. And for progressives, you must hold that seat this April because Justice Abramson, to have the shot in 2020 of flipping the majority of the court. Right now it's 4-3 conservatives. Now go to 2020. If Lisa Neubauer wins, all these ifs, right? If she wins, yes, Kelly has a steep hill to climb with a Democratic turnout for president if the primary is still going. It could be done by April of 2020. And oh, by the way, if you're these conservative groups and you're looking at going, okay, this control the court, they will open their wallets wide to try and help Daniel Kelly. So it's not like it's a done deal. He's going to be in trouble, but he just got a lot of bad news.
P.S. He's a political neophyte too.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't active. He was
First
out
campaign,
in private practice. Now he's on the Supreme Court. So
judge, he became a judge of being a member of the Federal Society. He was appointed to the court at the urging of conservatives who wanted a deep thinker on the bench. They passed over people like Mark Gundrum, former lawmaker, who's on the appeals court.
Right.
They passed over him for this because they wanted that kind of leader intellectually, but he has no experience running a campaign.
Okay, 20 more seconds in overtime. The governor, of course, has been asked by Evers and others to veto these bills. You and I would be astonished. That's not going to happen.
Complete vetoes? Probably not. Maybe some tweaking around the edges to make things work? Yeah, possibly.
And do we know when he might do this?
He's got like, was it 10 days after he receives them, business days, to either veto it, sign it, let it become law without his signature.
Wisconsin has a new definition of lame duck session of the legislature. I'm Steve Walders.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
That's Rewind for December 7th.
Rewind, your week in review, is sponsored by the Transportation Development Association of Wisconsin. Sharing one goal, enhancing the quality of life in Wisconsin through the development and maintenance of a strong transportation network. The Transportation Development Association of Wisconsin. It's how we get there.